come to this geometric structure? Well, if you study the Egyptian, the Mayans, the Incas, all these people, the Indians, you know, all these people, they all did this crazy geometry thing. And they talked about it in various ways. But what is most impressive is that they left very tangible things out there that had to do with geometry. And the things they left out there, if they were little models, you know, 3 feet high, with, you know, easy to build, you'd say, well, you know, they must have instinctively figured this out, right? But if they leave behind something like this, it brings a whole new set of questions to the forefront. And that is, how were they able to pull this off? Okay? Listen, I know that you've heard a lot of stories from your schooling about how pyramids were built. And I know that they told you mostly that these pyramids were built in a very specific way, and that's a fact. That is, between, depending on the theory, 20,000 to 100,000 slaves or farmers that during the Nile flooding every year would go and build pyramids. And they built them, in, depending on the theories, between 20 and 40 years, you know, period. And all this. And that's all nice and dandy. And you have to realize that they teach this as fact. For instance, when you read in those books, it says, well, the pyramids were built by, not may have built by, nothing like that. It's like facts. And you think, well, that must be it, right? But when you think about it, those people that are writing these facts are not engineers. They're not physicists. They don't necessarily understand what it takes to build things. They don't necessarily understand how difficult it is to get great precision from building with stones. They don't necessarily understand that copper doesn't cut stone, and that so far copper hasn't been found to be able to be hardened to cut stone. And so on. So they just throw this stuff out there, and because they have PhDs and they're in the 1800s and they can't imagine of anything else, then everybody goes with that. And I assure you, if you're doing a PhD in Egyptology or in antiquity, in ancient civilization studies or so on, and you write a thesis that these were built in any other way, you're probably not going to get your PhD. And so I was really kind of stunned because I started to study it, because to me, I had solved a lot of these issues, but there was something that just kept on nagging at me. It's like, maybe the history of the earth, maybe the history of our civilization is quite different than what we think it is. And if that's true, I want to know why. Because then I could modify my view of evolution to match the true reality of what happened out there. And that could change a lot of things in the way I think of myself and my ancestors and the way things have been done and my place in the universe. So I started to study these things, and I tell you, when you start studying these things, just a little, and I'm in contact with a lot of physicists, so if I can't run the math, I can ask people their opinion and so on. And when you study these things just a little, right away, you're confronted with amazing, amazing data. For instance, the Grand Pyramid at Giza is 481 feet tall. It's built out of 2,300,000 stones in average, approximately. And the base of the pyramid is 13 acres square. Okay? when they placed the last stones on the top of the Grand Pyramid of Giza, which we don't have at this point. You see, the stone on the Grand Pyramid of Giza were ripped out. See, there was a covering on the stones all over the pyramid that was mined to build Cairo in the early 1900s and late 1800s. And so these stones were extremely perfect. The pyramids was much more perfect before. But still to this day, when you look at the immensity of the building and then you get satellite mapping of the apex of the pyramid, the apex is 1/4 of an inch off the center of a 13-acre square base. I don't know if we have builders in the crew here today, but I guarantee you this type of achievement, after having placed 2,300,000 stone, is not anything any engineering firm with all of the money in the world and the technology we have is able to reproduce today. I assure you. We cannot do that. We cannot reproduce that. You have to divide 1/4 of an inch by 2,300,000 stones to be able to get the accuracy of the placements of the stones. It's a very amazing thing. And then by the time they were done, the orientation of the pyramid to the stellar pole and so on, the way the pyramid is oriented and so on is extremely accurate, more accurate than many of our current buildings, including telescopes and such. The size, the enormous size of the building is beyond any comprehension. And there's another issue that's very, very dramatic. There is blocks in the Grand Pyramid in the King's Chamber. There's 100 blocks of granite that have been hoisted to up to 130 feet of elevation in the Grand Pyramid and placed in perfect accuracy to create a relief of the pressure of the stones above with very amazing engineering, so that the whole thing holds together in a way that is unmatchable with all of our technology today. There's another problem, okay, in archaeology here. Archaeology is really the art of decoding text, decoding the remains of a civilization, and from these decoding, extrapolating their morses, their behavior, their day-to-day life, and so on. Well, if you follow that path, you would expect that somewhere in Egypt, after having placed thousands and thousands and thousands of hieroglyphs in all the temples and tombs and everywhere, okay, telling us everything about the behaviors of their morses, like what they ate, how they went to the washroom, what they did, and how they did it, and everything. I mean, they tell us everything, how they made love and everything, right? That somewhere somebody would have mentioned, oh, by the way, we built the pyramids too. Don't you think? I mean, you'd expect that, right? But not one wall says that. Nothing in Egypt says we built the pyramids. Nothing in Mayan country says we built the pyramids. Nothing in Inca tradition says we built the pyramid. You know how they tell you that the pyramids were built as tombs. And these tombs were there to have the pharaoh be buried into, right? You've all heard that. And you would expect that the reason they're telling you that is that they found mummies of pharaohs in pyramids. And typically when you look at the books or when you look at the reports from Egypt and so on, they typically show the pharaoh's tombs and then cut to the pyramids and show this all together in a way that you think that you're looking at this pharaoh tomb and it's in a pyramid. Well, it's a fact, however, that not one mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Not only in Egypt, but anywhere else in the world for that matter. Okay? In Egypt particularly, mummies were all found in underground vaults that have nothing to do with the pyramids. So when you think that a pharaoh that built this huge monument to have himself buried in it would at least put on the front, you know, a little epitaph, so and so from this year to this year, we built this pyramid to bury myself, whatever. There is pyramids in Egypt that were completely sealed when they were found, including the Grand Pyramid at Giza. And the archaeologists, at the time almost treasure hunters, had to dynamite their way in many of these pyramids. They couldn't find an entrance. The entrances were plugged with immense 20-ton boulders that was so well matched to the rest of the pyramid, they couldn't find an entrance. So they would dynamite their way in, and in the case of the Grand Pyramid, they fell into a tunnel, and then they backtracked to the entrance, and then they could clear the plugs. And then typically, in some of these pyramids, they would get to the sarcophagus, and the sarcophagus would still be sealed. And it would have a slab of granite on top of it that weighed in excess of 20 tons. And they would lift the slab with great difficulties, unseal the supposed tomb, and find it empty. Completely empty. What was their conclusion? Tomb robbers got there before them. The tomb robbers somehow found the entrance, removed the plug, went in there, took all the treasures, removed the mummy body, lifted the lid, removed the body, took all the rest of the stuff, cleaned everything up, put the lid back on, sealed it back up, went back out, closed the plug, redid everything good, and walked out of there. I don't think so. And so there is huge difficulties in this. There is huge difficulties in these theories. Those are theories. They're not facts. And when you examine these theories, they have immense holes in them. Very large holes that involves thousands of tons of material. So for instance, you have things like the Sphinx. The Sphinx is right in front of the pyramids at Giza. The Sphinx, unlike a lot of people think, is not actually a built model, but is actually a carved statue, carved right out of the Giza Plateau. And there's very interesting things. Now, if you were commissioned to build the Sphinx, what would you do? Now, you've got this huge plateau with this, very good rock in it to carve, and you would want to start carving. So you have to cut the enclosure around the Sphinx body to be able to carve the body. And what they did here is that instead of moving out of the enclosures, little blocks that you would see here, you see, out of the enclosure, if it was you that was commissioned, you'd probably remove 100 pound block, maybe 200-pound block, maybe 500 pound. If you have a good crane, maybe up to like 1,000 pound, maybe 2,000 pound. You wouldn't, I mean, why would you try to remove anything bigger, right? It'd be easier to, to deal with. You move things that match your level of technology. You don't move things that makes it difficult for you to move them, right? Well, the Egyptian somehow, supposedly, moved these blocks from the enclosure. Now, these blocks are known to have come out of the enclosure because the stratas on the blocks match exactly where the strata is here, and you can actually tell where each block goes. And these blocks weigh in the excess of 200 tons. Now these guys, seemingly 4,000 years ago, was moving 200-ton blocks casually, and not only just moving them, but stacking them. Okay? To create what is known as the Valley Temple or the Sphinx Temple in front of the Sphinx. Those are very, very disturbing pieces of data. They are not simply and easily dealt with or, pushed under the carpet. The Sphinx as well has all sorts of erosions on it that do have impact on our concepts of when the Sphinx was built or carved. New evidence has shown that the erosion that you find on the Sphinx body and then on the Sphinx enclosure, this is the enclosure from where the 200-ton blocks were relieved. The erosion that's seen here demands that there was large amount of rain for long periods of time to create it. We know historically and geologically that the amount of rain needed to create that type of erosion could only happen up to 10,000 years ago after the last ice age. That would mean that the Sphinx was not carved 4,000 years ago, but maybe up to 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. So now you have an even larger archaeological problem. You've got people 10,000 years ago going around with 200-ton blocks. It's a serious issue at that point. There is another temple that's a very important temple in Egypt that's not so well known and recognized, that is very well guarded at this time, that is an anomaly in Egyptian buildings. This is called the Osiris Temple. This is fresh from Abydos. And these blocks are polished pink granite in excess of 100-ton to 200-ton blocks stacked and organized into this incredible building. Now, look at the size of this block above his head. There are tongues and grooves. It's very highly engineered. You got to realize that we're talking about Egyptian here that's supposed to not have the wheel. They don't have the pulley. They don't have a crane to grab things and put them on top of things. Certainly not things that big. And this temple is typically as well a big controversy because, as you see, there's water on the bottom of it. It typically floods annually or almost all the time because it's below the Nile level. The temple is dug into the ground. So when the archaeologists first found it, they said, oh, the Egyptian dug and then built from there. But there's no other evidence in Egypt that the Egyptian would do that to build the temple. And when geologists look at the sides of the temple, they notice that the geological layering on the side of the temple would make it so that it's actually the other way around. The temple was there, and then the sedimentation from the Nile generated all the layers that eventually buried the temple. And then the archaeologists, lady archaeologists, found it and dug it out. Now, that would make this temple much older than previously believed. Like right now is being dated at about 4,000 years old. It would ask that that temple was there approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. And eventually I came across these things that were thought to have been popularized now as the flower of life. Here's another picture of it. Again, those are fresh pictures. It's very difficult to find these pictures. You can study, I studied this temple all the way back to the original papers that were published on it, and I was never able to get one of these pictures, and actually really glad to have them now. And you can see them again, and so they're high on the pillars. And what's really amazing about this graph, this geometry that's imprinted on the granite, is that it's not cut, it's not etched into the granite, it's burnt into the atomic structure of the granite. It's burnt onto it like if it was laser burnt on the granite. And that poses a very large problem when you're thinking of 10,000 years ago, people going around burning stuff with lasers. Interestingly, when you take this geometry and you extrapolate it into 3D structures, now each circle becomes a sphere. The petals that we were discussing earlier, or the lobes we were discussing earlier, appears, and if you place a tetrahedron in each sphere, you get the 64 tetrahedron grid. The reason I'm mentioning all this is that there's evidence that there's people in this world that were able to do things in a manner that's completely different than how we do things today, and that exceed our capacity to do them today with all of our technology. Maybe, just maybe, because our technology is based on reactive, explosive technologies instead of contractive space-time curvature technologies, which would allow us to control gravitational fields and so on. These Egyptians had hieroglyphs as well that represented their highest level of initiation. The highest level of initiation that had to do with those sun gods. And they, this higher level of initiation always related, or typically related, to the eye of Horus. And when they used this hieroglyph in their writing, it's interesting to note that when they did, they used each part of the eye for a specific fraction of mathematics, and that each fraction went on towards the 1/64th fraction, which is the dynamics of the division of tetrahedron array in space. The other thing is that these 200-ton blocks were not their only level of achievement. This statue has been found in the middle of the desert, a few hundred miles away from the quarry where it was cut. And it's a statue is believed to be of Ramses II, I believe. And it has, it's a granite statue, extremely highly polished, that is made out of one block of granite that weighs in excess of 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons. These are very, very large anomalies. There's not just pyramids in Egypt. There's pyramids in many other countries, in South America and in Mexico and so on. And most people don't know, now remains of pyramids have been found in many other countries. This is Japan, underwater, near the island of Okinawa. These are the remains of pyramids that went under the water a very long time ago. What's great about pyramids that went underwater is that when they do, you get organic growth on it. See, when you're dating things, and you're using carbon dating, when you do so, you can carbon date things that have carbon in it that is organic life. So, for instance, when they carbon date pyramids in South America and so on, they say, well, you know, we'll carbon date this guy that was buried beside it, or we carbon date, you know, this campfire, or we carbon date what we find here, and then they extrapolate that these people were the builders of the pyramid. But when a thing like that goes under the water, then coral growth happens. And that is organic life, so you can carbon date at least when it went under the water. And when this was carbon dated, then it showed that this pyramid must have gone underwater 10 to 12,000 years ago, at the flooding of the last ice age. Now that would be when it went underwater. That is not necessarily when it was constructed. This is a picture of a pyramid that was found. It was found as a result of an error that a Second World War American pilot did while flying over China, and he came across this. He was lost, and he came across this pyramid and took a black and white picture of it. And it was published, and a lot of people screamed to hoaxes and everything. And I used to never show that in my presentation because there was too much controversy about it. There's over 100 different pyramids in China. And people in general don't know that. They're very, very large. Some of them, they're very typical. They resemble very much the pyramids of South America and Mexico. Here's a satellite picture of them. You can see them here. And interestingly, when you look very closely at the satellite pictures of the pyramids, you find that they resemble very much so what we find at Giza. This is China, this is Giza, and this is Teotihuacan off north from Mexico City. Same angles, same alignments, and all of these alignments match the stars of the belt of Orion. And that I find very interesting. Because many of the civilizations talked about these advanced beings coming from the Orion constellation and the star Sirius. And so maybe they left us evidence of their passage. Now when you go to the sacred sites of the knowledge of the sun gods from the Chinese tradition, you go to the Forbidden City, and at the entrance of the city, typically you have the Sphinx. The Sphinx, both in Egypt and in China and other traditions, is considered the guardian of knowledge and is usually placed at the entrance, and they guard the knowledge. And the interesting thing about those statues that guard the knowledge in the case of the Sphinx, it's thought that the knowledge is guarded under the paws of the Sphinx. Now, interestingly, Edgar Casey said that we were going to find chambers under the paws of the Sphinx, and now with seismological equipment, they've been able to find chambers. They seem to be chambers under the paws of the Sphinx. But what's under the paws of this guardian? Well, when you look carefully, he's guarding the knowledge, which is a sphere with the lobes of the geometry of space embedded in it. And again, we find this information just percolating all around the world in these places where there's incredible buildings, incredible amount of knowledge. And, you know, sure enough, these traditions in China are linked to the knowledge of the I Ching and the Yin Yang. And the Yin Yang is the torus viewed from above, as we saw earlier. And then the I Ching is made out of 64 symbols, each symbol being made out of 6 sticks, right? And the way you define each symbol relative to each other is that the sticks are either broken or full. And usually they're arranged in a circle, like so, where 1 is in opposition to 64, 2 is in opposition to 63, 3 is in opposition to 62, and so on. And each one has the same number of full stick and the same number of broken stick. It's just that they're arranged differently between 2 pairs. Now, I was looking at this, and again, I was in my van decoding this a long time ago, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, if I take 6 sticks and I put them together in a geometry, if they're the same length, then the only geometry I can generate out of those 6 sticks is a tetrahedron. And I thought, okay, that kind of works, so maybe the code has to do with tetrahedrons. But what would it be about the broken sticks? What are the broken sticks about? What's going on? Smaller tetrahedrons, what's going on? And it took me a while to figure this out, but eventually I realized that when you follow the code of the I Ching, it goes 1, 64, and they're in opposition. So if you took 1, this is 1 here, and then this is 64, and you put them together, then the sticks have to intersect. And that's why you have the broken sticks, because when they intersect, they get broken. Bang, 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 bang. And here's your star tetrahedron structure. And so you can continue to build the I Ching, okay, and follow the code and continue to build the star tetrahedron structure with the positive and the negative and the positive and the negative. And by the time you're finished, you will have a 512 tetrahedron grid, which is just happens to be the next fractal level from 64. So then you have all the fractal, you know, progression. It's very important. I mean, these are fundamental beliefs that we have around the world. They're very important traditions that have very important sets of data that are telling us about the structure of space-time, that are telling us about the dynamics of space-time.